My name is Emad. I'm a good example of a jack of all trades, master of none. I've done engineering. I was a civil engineer before coming to UK, and I did interior architecture after a while. And I'm originally from Iran, but it's been 17 years I've been living, studying, and working in UK. So this is my Blender journey. And you may ask, why Blender? There are a couple of actually handful of reasons why I actually chose this software. Uh, from the morality point of view, some people believe that information should be circulated for free, even including books. And when I realized that there is a software which is open source, I got really happy. And another actually reason was Blender was free. And I couldn't afford actually those subscription for 3D Studio Max and other softwares. On the other hand, when you actually have a pirated version of these softwares, after your computer actually update itself, for example, new Windows or something, definitely some of the softwares do not work. And I was not in the position to adjust those things and download stuff myself. And later on, when I actually actually converted to Mac, I had to be official and I had to purchase all the softwares that I needed. And Blender was one of them that I accidentally got introduced to it. Another silly reason is when I actually opened the software, I actually saw this default cube. I know that so many people actually do not like the cube and delete it right away. Uh, I actually started getting familiar with the software with the help of the cube because I could relate to the cube. Uh, Actually doing engineering and architecture and stuff, cube is one of the main shapes that designers, architects, engineers work because it's very functional. You can actually create modular system and so on. So uh, although I'm not a cube conformist, but my love of cube was that much that I actually had it ordered one for me out of concrete, the same size and shape and color as the default cube, which sits on my desk. Anyway, back in 10 years ago, before doing anything with Blender, um, as part of uh, actually full-time work as an architectural designer, I used to work for an architecture firm, and we created a 3D visualization section in that firm. And it was basically me. For marketing reasons, we called it a 3D Genius. And at that time, I started creating stuff using AutoCAD, using Vectorworks, and for 3D Works, it was SketchUp, and I rendered stuff with V-Ray. V-Ray was very difficult to learn and grasp, and because the computer was not that powerful. I mean, because of the render time, long render time, uh, based on pure trial and error, it was a very lengthy, difficult way of learning. So I tried to experiment with whatever I could, creating stuff and exploring my spatial understanding and the lighting, colors, and stuff in 3D. Because generally speaking, architecture, everything starts off with wireframe naturally. So after a while, I actually obviously my main job was doing the regular stuff like blueprint and the normal bits and pieces of an architecture firm, but I was doing all the presentation for the clients and doing bits and pieces of these 3D forms. So sometimes it was my own concepts and it was not designed for anyone, but we were working on this to keep ourselves creative and busy. Uh, and I remember that this one, I designed it and I put it in the actual photograph of the site, but I was dreaming to be able to create the environment 3D one day. Or for example, this abstract chair, I actually made it with hand out of blue foam and professionally painted it. I wanted to do these sort of organic shapes one day in 3D, but with SketchUp, it was not possible. And I couldn't do it in AutoCAD, for example. And it was the same sort of things. And obviously, we were offering clients some sort of this style of illustration. And as you see over here, I remember there was a software called Piranesi, named after an Italian artist. And we were doing some actually digital illustration that looked like watercolor or something. Some people actually loved it at that time. And if it was photorealistic, this was the best I could do at that time. And briefly, I was introduced to a software called Vue, which was designed for environment design. But I soon realized that with a computer with 1 gig or 4 gig of RAM and with a basic graphics card, it was not possible to do this sort of large scale things, visualization. Anyway, another reason of actually choosing software that is capable of doing other things rather than just the modeling was this dot, line, and shape. I was thinking about doing other things as well, but here it has got an irony, because in every 3D software, you start with a vertex and then you may extrude it. I mean, becomes a line and then a couple of lines. It's a face. Extruding the face becomes a geometry or something. But have a quick look at this animation that I did in stop motion style. At that time, I was thinking about doing working with a software that can do such a thing, or this one, which I made based on line. It was called Bear in Mind. I did these ones with stop motion, in stop motion style, using Dragon Frame. It's the name of a software. And this one I did, it's called Wooden Shoes. So the problem with doing this sort of style, like manual, is when the production is done, you cannot do nothing about it. You cannot go back to the scene and change something. So I knew that I was after a software that helps me doing this sort of creative work as well. And this next one is my first ever animation. And my knowledge of modeling at that time with Blender was just a cube. It has got some music as well. I don't know if you could hear the music as well, but it was G minor by Albinoni. And I was trying to actually blow life into just the cube to give them some sort of, to create some emotions within that. Anyway, going back to modeling, this was the first time I was dealing with 2.79, and which, it was one of the most difficult things I've done in my life, because I couldn't figure out where to start, which actually attribute to change. And after I actually spent a couple of months of learning Blender 2.79, I realized that they are going to change the architecture of the software completely and rewrite the code, which was 1 million lines of codes. So I actually did not touch Blender and waited until this 2.8 came out, and I wanted to actually wait for some tutorials in order to learn it. So there was a gap between the time that I started with 2.79 and then 2.8. But anyway, I started by doing some tutorials. You may recognize some of the tutorials from YouTube, and it was really exciting time for me. And gradually I got the confidence in order to do bits and pieces and experiment with anything that I could think of. So low poly modeling and just texturing, and just like all of you, our hard drive is full of unfinished things. And later on, when I started dealing with the lighting and the material and stuff like that, I have to actually mention this from now. You may hear it from me more often. I've got something like 12 years of photography under my belt. So I have done proper photography from studio, actually lighting, product, not commercially working, but working here and there, like freelance basis. And I have taught some courses, I mean, like master classes in Photoshop to photographers in Hampstead Photographic Society. So I'm very much familiar with photography as a discipline. And this is very important in 3D. If someone wants to actually have good renders, they need to actually look into photography as well and experiment with lighting. All those experiences in photography comes really, really handy. And sometimes the material, you can create these material in Blender. These are procedural, like it's called car paint or orange peel. And the way it just interacts, it's fascinating. And here I wanted to create a like granite type of material. So whichever actually technique I could see on YouTube and stuff, I tried to imitate and follow. And these are all actually personal projects. So I could actually think about the concept. I tried to actually put it together. Sometimes it was just the idea or based on a sketch or something. Some of, as I said, some of the stuff are finished, some of them are not. But anyway, when it comes to hard surface modeling, from here, this is my actual portfolio. This is an example of hard surface modeling. So when I actually started learning it, I realized that there are a couple of things you need to pay attention. For example, one of them is using the bevel edges, because in reality, every surface that you can think of has got some round edges. If you cannot see it, if you look at it with a magnifier or something, you can see it. And it helps to actually reflect or actually interact with the light, and it looks much nicer. On the other hand, another thing is doing stuff destructively or non-destructively. And when you want to actually do non-destructively, you may get to know Boolean operation and other things. And sometimes in hard surface modeling, if you one of the main problems at very earliest stage is the shading issue. Sometimes you realize that your shading is not right. But when you combine the Boolean operation and Boolean comes after the Boolean logic in mathematics and coding, when you subtract or add geometries from each other or to each other. And if you combine Boolean operation and bevel, try to actually have the corners round, you're opening the gate to hell. You make your life very difficult because it's not that easy to resolve these sort of issues. Anyway, this is my take on Iron Giant. It was based on an animation in 1999. It was a favorite animation. And I tried to actually do as close and to the original design. You can watch it online or on Amazon Video. And I even modeled the underneath of the foot, but I need to learn how to rig in order to pose this, even before animating it, just to pose it. Anyway, this is my take on, again, another nostalgic, actually, stop motion animation. It was based on Postman Pat. I think it was early 80s. I loved this car from the childhood, and I wanted to create that. So on YouTube, I saw a couple of episodes, and I wanted to create it myself. I also purchased a small toy of that. And so sometimes for the interior, I had to improvise because there was not enough references for that. So I came up with ideas and I modeled that. And later on, I thought that maybe one day a company wants to manufacture this. So let's think about building it up from scratch. I started from the chassis and came up with this, and then tried to come up with other things to put them together as a car, making it finished. So I added this part, and then I created the engine and the interior and bits and pieces. And then this is the engine itself, a powerful engine with good old air filter. And and for this one and the previous project, I think 90% of this is non-destructive. So if someone asked me to modify this and change this, for example, shape, the bevels and stuff, I could do that. And that's the good thing, the beauty of going non-destructive. And again, some other details, I'm sure that people as old as me would miss these sort of things in the new cars. This is a detailed tire I did, and you can actually find good tutorials on YouTube, several of them. And I followed one of them and tried to come up with my own thing, which is this. Later on in future, if I create a military sporty hybrid truck, I will use these tires. And I wanted to create something that look realistic. This is my take on Anvil, Andrew Price's. Actually, Blender Guru has inspired so many people, but I have to admit that I didn't do the donut. I started from this or other things I do not remember. What I wanted to, I believe that if someone wants to follow a tutorial, they need to push it to make it either as good as the tutor or even make it better. Not just doing something and leave it somewhere. I mean, try to push it, or maybe it's a good idea to modify it to some extent and come up with your own design or add details and stuff like that. And this is my take on a glass of beer. I think it's a Ruby beer or something. And for this one, I introduced 4 different particle system to create different sizes of the bubbles and the condensation and stuff. And almost 95% of this is Blender, and 5% or less, some touched up of these trickles, I did it in Photoshop. And even with the foam, there are different actually particle system on top of each other in order to create different bubble sizes. An example of a product actually visualization. So I'm fascinated by product photography in real life, and I know that the future is just the CGI, because you get the chance to modify it at any time. I did this one, and here is another one, a clinic product, and something that I can see here and there is we all actually follow tutorials and try to learn how to create the stuff. In this case, the material of this frosted glass. But we need to pay good attention to what makes a material actually looks real. And one of the most important thing is lighting. Before that, obviously, you need to have a look at the thickness of the glass, because each glass has got some attributes, for example, reflection or refraction. But if you do not give the glass enough thickness, it does not refract correctly. So certain things are important. But another actually important aspect is the lighting. In this case, besides a complex lighting thing that I always actually do and create, there is a light source inside the bottom, and there is another light source in the base. So next time you create such a thing, try to implement those ones and see the effect by yourself. Here is another example of another tutorial that I followed, but as I mentioned, I try to push it to the extent to make it even better looking than the tutor. And I think this tutorial was done by Heavy Poly or something. I think it was 2 years ago or something. And although it was the best I could create at that time, it's not the most realistic in terms of the render engine, because Cycles is still unidirectional path tracing. And for realistic lighting or creating the all the realistic effects, you need a bi-directional render engine, like Lux renderer or other professional renderer out there. I haven't tried those ones yet. Here is a glass without a reference, visual reference. As I mentioned about the thickness, you need to pay attention to the inside geometry as well as the outside. And for some realism, this is my bottle of wine. There is this guy who is fantastic. He's called Derek Elliott. And if you're interested in product visualization, just look him up. He's got a YouTube channel as well. Derek Elliott, American guy. And I actually looked at his tutorial on the wine, but I did my own thing. And here are some close-ups of the geometry and the details, as you can see on the foil. And obviously for this sort of pattern, some people may start with the geometry, but it's a good idea to bring the SVG file and just use that one. And on here, I wanted to create something emotional, maybe Christmassy, Valentine type of, but if these sort of images, if I can animate them and with some slow motion, I mean, they look really good. And I mean, I want to push it, my standard, one day that I have a portfolio of this sort of stuff, because Blender is not just a hobby for me. I want to get a job with it. This is another actually project I did, again based on a tutorial by CG Master and basketball from the childhood. I admired the design of the ball. And this is an example of a low poly modeling. This is very low poly of this rocket launcher. And for the smoke and the mist, I used the volumetric. I think it was done with, yes, it definitely was done with cycles rendered. And this is without volumetric. So I think I used Shadow Catcher as well, an example of low poly modeling. This one was totally procedural. So I created all the pebbles and the stones and everything, like 4 or 5 different sets of particle system. And every single pebble are different colors and different sizes. And that's the beauty of doing something procedural. And Blender is doing actually having a leap. And so much will be offered procedural within Blender. But it was my first actually experimentation, and I was thinking about the early morning, actually post-apocalyptic type of environment. But I wanted to create some sort of sci-fi-ish butterfly, but I didn't have time. And sometimes I have to abandon a project in order to do something else. Here I downloaded the snow material. I think it's free. But snow is very difficult to work with because it's very heavy on the memory and the hardware. And I'm not particularly keen of that, because the background is an image, is not 3D, but I carefully actually adapt and adjust the lighting so that it goes well with that. For organic modeling, obviously Blender is fully capable of creating organic shapes in the sculpting tab. So I started learning it by doing, some experimentation, obviously. And with this one, the background again is not in Blender, it's the 2D image. But the creature, I came up with this creature. It took me just 2 hours to finish this. And I wanted to, you can actually create alien looking creatures, and it gives all the options, brushes and other tools in order to control the geometry. But it takes time in order to build things in a standard way with the correct topology. Here is something that I did, inspired by a candle that I saw in Etsy. Etsy is a website that artists sell their work, like arts and crafts things. And I wanted to study the anatomy gradually, and this is what I came up. And this is almost one of the good works in terms of the anatomically correct sculpting. For doing this, I had to go back to the drawing board, and I had to study how, actually I bought books, I bought dummies, I bought dummy skulls, and I had to learn what's the anatomy is like, what's the proportions, what's the golden ratio. And because a small variation in the right, and actually in the anatomy, it makes a human looks like an alien or a monkey or something like that. So you need to pay attention to that. And this is, I remember the first head that I created was as big as the, I don't know, helmet, crash helmet, and it didn't look correct and nice. And this is the anatomically correct actually sculpt. So I had to study the muscles. Muscles has got different names, Latin names, but it's good to get to know the bone structures and the muscles, and then build everything on top of each other. This is an unfinished work, and as you can see, even the legs and thighs are not attached yet. But when you go realistic, I think you're inviting problems, and I couldn't create the fingers easily. So I have to practice a lot before learning. And then I have to learn how to pose the model, because if you don't know how to pose the model, just based on one static position, you may actually create something, but later on, it's not that easy to change. And this is an example of a stylized thing that I did. And I came up with the, I don't know, the facial expression and the face and the material, subscattering, and, you know, the outfit. And obviously the next stage for me is to learn how to rig and pose this, because when they are in the T pose, they don't look natural. And here is an example of an old work, and I did the outfit in Marvelous Designers trial version, and it was very difficult because I created the body in Blender with metaballs, but Marvelous Designer doesn't like metaballs, and unlike ZBrush, which has got something similar, which is called Z-Sphere. I haven't worked with ZBrush, but I know that. But it was very frustrating, and I didn't know how to do, and I rectified it by hacking and, you know, cheating. But this one was the creature that I came up with in Blender. And quick animations like this one, like this, just to present the model. Again, it was old. And you may recognize some of these ones from the YouTube cloth simulation. Or this fuzzy looking creature. So every time I follow a tutorial, I learn something. For this one, I use the bloom effect, as you can see. And this one, another cloth sim. And later on, this is an old work, but if I want to work on it in future, I might actually use the volumetric and moving clouds, or maybe a plane. I mean, it would add to its realism. And this one, I wanted to create the snowfall. And although I was happy with the dynamics and the physics of it, I was not happy with the shape of it. And I tried as many variations as I could, and none of them worked. I even tried to create the actual shapes of the snowflakes. But the best way is to create the volumetric material. But unfortunately, Eevee volumetric on Eevee doesn't work on Mac. So, and I couldn't afford, I cannot afford doing it in cycles because it takes ages to render. So maybe with this, I don't know, maybe in future Mac, I mean volumetric on Mac becomes available. At the moment, it doesn't work. And this one, I wanted to create something satisfying. And I think that's it for me.